And now, your host, Matthew Berry!
Thank you, Jeff. We are the Not Ready for Basic Cable players. And welcome to our new show, a digital preview before our TV launch. Our promise to you, in the next few months, we're going to make you a smarter fantasy player and a much dumber person. Today on the show, we're talking about early running back storylines. So my producer, Secret Squirrel, Daniel Dopp, what kind of show will we have today? That sounds about right. That's fair. I think that's an accurate representation of what you're in store for. Time now for the Five-ish at Five-ish, the five or so biggest stories in fantasy. Let's face it, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. We start with big news out of Dolphins camp, where last year's waiver wire pickup turned fantasy stud Ajayi left practice with a concussion. Ajay, of course, finished last year as the 11th best running back in fantasy, and so far in early drafts, he's been taken as an RB1. I want to pause for a moment here and do a blind resume between two running backs, okay? Look at this. Player A whopping 28.3 fantasy points per game. That's PPR scoring. 7 yards per carry, a touchdown per game. Player B, just 12.2 fantasy points per game, 4.3 yards per carry, averaging just half a touchdown a game. So who are these guys? Well, they're both Ajayi. Player A, Ajayi versus the Bills last year when he had those two monster 200-yard games. Player B, Ajayi versus everyone else. So much of his production last year came in 3 games, those Bill games and the one against the Steelers. You know, when you look at our Tristan Cockcroft's consistency rankings, which you can find on ESPN.com, Ajayi's start percentage last year was just 56%. Now, start percentage is a metric that Tristan uses to illustrate how often a player was worthy of starting. In other words, Ajayi, who's going in the first round in some cases, finished as a top 25 running back in ESPN standard scoring last year just 9 times. At age 24, he's already suffered through an ACL tear, and there are other lingering concerns with his injury history. Head coach Adam Gase said earlier in the offseason he will not be afraid to give Ajayi 300 carries this year if necessary, which is awesome if he can stay healthy. But that is a huge workload for someone who has had injury concerns throughout his young career. Will Ajayi be able to handle it? At the moment, I'm much more comfortable with him as a high-end RB2 than the mid-level RB1 he's currently being drafted at. So this weekend, Christian McCaffrey ran around in shorts, and apparently everyone was really impressed. Although, let's face it, if Daniel Dopp is any indication, I'm not sure how much stock we should put into a guy working out in shorts. What is that? What are with those socks, dude? I did not see this shoot before. All right, fine. Panthers' other running back, Jonathan Stewart, had this to say about McCaffrey. Quote, he's pretty unstoppable as far as coming out of the backfield and running routes. I can tell you now, there's not going to be anyone in this league that can cover him one-on-one. Speaking of quotes from Panthers, did you hear this one? Eagle has a tweet. All right, so this is from @JJones9, SI.com reporter Jonathan Jones. He tweets, quote, Ron Rivera, McCaffrey will be used a lot in the vein of how they used him at Stanford. This was around the time of the draft this tweet came out. So how did they use McCaffrey at Stanford? How about 290 touches in 11 games last year? Okay, that works out to 26 touches a game. Now, in college, it was much more runs than passes. In the NFL, I think it's going to be the reverse. But still, 40% of Stanford's yards from scrimmage in 2016 was from McCaffrey. That is the most by a Power 5 player last year. All right, so maybe Rivera was exaggerating about McCaffrey's usage a little bit, but ESPN's David Newton, reporting from Panthers camp, talked about how they're throwing various bubble screens and finding different ways to get McCaffrey the ball early in camp. And I think this is what they want to do. Just quick 3-step drop from Cam Newton, get rid of the ball quickly to McCaffrey. That avoids Cam getting hit and lets McCaffrey do what he does best, run after the catch, get him in space, and use that speed. Big question, of course, is how they're going to use McCaffrey in the red zone when they still have Jonathan Stewart, Cam Newton, not to mention Big Kelvin Benjamin and Greg Olsen. Either way, McCaffrey is going to be a PPR stud this year. Speaking of the goal line, according to Mike Reese, there's a new LeGarrette Blount in New England. His name, Mike Gillislee. And that is big news for Gillislee. Patriots, of course, have led the NFL in red zone carries each of the last 3 years. Last year, LeGarrette Blount was the beneficiary, scoring a touchdown on 45% of rushes inside the 5-yard line. That was 19th best in the NFL. He had 18 touchdowns last year. Gillislee, however, this guy scored a touchdown on 70% of his rushes inside the 5-yard line last year. That was 4th best in the NFL. Dude has a nose for the end zone. look, I get it. Patriots running backs are insanely unpredictable, and you always take opening weekend training camp news with a grain of salt. That was even lamer than when I did it in practice, by the way. It's an old joke and I can't even nail it. Good job. All right. But when this delicious piece of salt comes from a guy like Mike Reese, who's been covering the team forever, and it's backing up what I've been thinking all along, that is Gillislee was brought in specifically for the role of running the ball on the goal line for a team that, runs on the goal line often, I like that. I am good with his current ADP of running back 27th, 8th round. Even in PPR, he's going to be at least a legit RB2 going at flex prices. So some more sneaky big news out of Bucs camp recently, as general manager Jason Licht says Doug Martin not guaranteed to be the starter when he returns from suspension at week number 4. This means Jacquizz Rodgers, currently going as running back 53 in the 15th round on ESPN.com. Woo, woo, woo! Wow. It's a Red Alert Sleeper special. That's why we had that sweet sound effect. No expense too great for us. Nice job, Secret Squirrel. Look, Jacquizz Rodgers is going to start at least 3 games. You look at the Bucs' first 3 games, at Miami, versus Chicago, at Minnesota. All 3 of them struggled in run defense last year. Quiz has 6 career games where he's gotten 15 or more carries. And in those games, averaging 4.4 yards per carry. Remember last year, he got a chance to be the lead back? Well, from weeks 5 through 8 last season, on a points per game basis, Jacquizz Rodgers was the 13th best running back in fantasy. We know Dirk Cutter loves Rodgers from their time together in Atlanta. It's why he brought him over to Tampa Bay. And we saw how well he did last year. Will you all please stop, by the way, with the Charles Sims talk? He's injury prone, and he failed last year when he got a chance to be the lead back. Quiz is going to be the guy for the first 3. And if he does well, and based on what Light said, not to mention Doug Martin's injury history, he could be the guy a lot longer. So let me get this straight. 3 games starting and possibly more for a guy going in the 15th round? Come on, people. Let's get on this. Okay, so one of the biggest questions facing fantasy owners is what will happen to Ezekiel Elliott? Our own Adam Schefter reported a while ago that there is a growing sense Elliott could face a, quote, short suspension. Now, per Schefter, there's no decision expected this week from the NFL, but with the Cowboys signing veteran running back Ronnie Hillman, there is a thought that the Cowboys are adding depth to prepare for potentially being without Zeke for a short while. So if the Cowboys are preparing, should fantasy owners? And honestly, no. Look, last year, Melvin Gordon missed 3 games, finishes the 7th best running back in fantasy. Le'Veon Bell missed 4 games. He finishes the 3rd best running back in fantasy. And you think anyone in your league was concerned about Tom Brady last year when he missed the first 4 after he went 28-2 down the stretch? Just 2 interceptions, ridiculous. Stud bell cow running backs with the talent and opportunity of a guy like Ezekiel Elliott are few and far between in the NFL. We don't even know what, if any, the suspension will be, but let's just say it's 3 games, okay? Make sure you grab Darren McFadden, currently going in the 14th round. Or even if you don't get McFadden, whoever your number 3 or 4 running back is, it will be before the buys, you can just start there. I'm not changing my ranking at all. He's still my number 3 player overall. Look at our projections. Zeke, plus 3 games of a replacement level running back, is still going to be the 3rd best running back in fantasy. Heck, Zeke plus 3 games of this guy, I cannot show this footage enough, will probably be better than most. By the way, that's the first callback of the season. Won't be the last. No one runs a joke into the ground like your guy right here. All right, so while we wait on a decision from the NFL, unless it's like a huge suspension, 4 games or more, don't adjust your rankings. So I turn now to my podcast producer, Secret Squirrel. Daniel, your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm actually all in on Ezekiel Elliott too, so Cowboy up. You know what I mean?
Nice job, you and I, on the
absolutely.
same page from day one.
This is my big concern, so
Okay.
help me out with this, okay? If I draft Ezekiel Elliott, my concern is, do I go after his handcuff, which would be Darren McFadden, or yet-to-be-determined Cowboy running back behind that big offensive line? Or am I looking at a guy like Giovanni Bernard or Duke Johnson, which you could also get in the 13th round, and in a PPR league, they definitely have some value. So would you rather have the real handcuff or the other team handcuff?
Or like just another guy that could be useful.
Exactly.
For me, honestly, I want McFadden. When I'm searching for guys listen, Giovanni Bernard and Duke Johnson are fine, but that's all they are. Is they're fine, they'll be solid contributors. If Ezekiel Elliott were to miss any time, those first 3 games if he gets suspended, or even if there were an injury, Darren McFadden suddenly becomes a top 10 fantasy running back. No question behind that line. So I'd much rather, when I'm in that range, when I'm in the later rounds, I'd much rather have a guy that has a chance to be an absolute stud, even if it would be for a short period of time, than somebody like Giovanni Bernard or Duke Johnson, who's fine. But there's a lot of flex-ish worthy guys,
Sure.
you know? And you can find those guys on the waiver wire as well. So I'm always going to swing for the fences when I'm that low, and I don't think there's that upside with Duke or Giovanni Bernard. Normally, this is where I tell you what's coming up later on the show, but honestly, it's only one segment. We got no commercial breaks because we're on digital. So make sure to check us out when the TV show debuts. That would be August 16th, 5 p.m. Eastern on ESPN2. That's right, Tony Reale, we are coming for you.
I give this show 3 weeks.